I will remain in post as Prime Minister until the contest is complete. And I will do everything I can to ensure an orderly handover of power. I will also give my successor my full and unequivocal support, knowing that they will inherit a Britain that is far stronger and fairer than the one I inherited 2 years ago, better prepared for the challenges ahead and better able to ensure the Labour Party secures a second term in office.
That was Keir Starmer this morning in London as he announced his resignation as Britain's Prime Minister. Members of Starmer's own Labour Party had been calling for new leadership for months, with speculation over his resignation growing last week after the mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, won a special election for Parliament. Burnham is reportedly eyeing the top job and what will be Britain's seventh Prime Minister in a decade. He's scheduled to be sworn into the House of Commons today and to speak with Starmer this week. Catty, even though there have been calls for this for months, what's the reaction to the resignation?
Everybody could see this coming over the course of the last few days. I have spoken to one British official who said to me, we can't just think that by changing the person at the top, we can change the fundamental problems that Britain has. And now the joke is in the UK, we're trying to be Italy. And that was the country that was constantly changing leadership. And Britain was meant to be known for stability. That certainly doesn't look to be the case, and whether Andy Burnham can make it better the British economy than Keir Starmer did just by being more charismatic, I think most people would say that remains to be seen. So let's go right live to London and bring in MS Now international reporter Ines de la Cuetera, who joins us from 10 Downing Street. So Ines, what has the reaction been there in London? Not totally unexpected. This had been signalled for a few days, but it is still Britain going through this process again of thinking we can change the person in 10 Downing Street just behind you and somehow change the direction of the country and the way the political system works.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, so, I mean, we did see Keir Starmer this morning coming out here outside of 10 Downing Street to announce he was stepping down as Prime Minister and as leader of the Labour Party. I will say he was quite emotional. You know, he was saying how everything he's done out of love for his country. He thanked his wife, his children. He said he would support whoever the next leader is, but that he doesn't feel he is the best person to lead Labour into the next election. Now, you guys mentioned it, but this all comes after that special election was held in Makerfield. The former mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, was running in that and had suggested that if he won, he would mount a formal leadership challenge. He did win, and so Starmer getting out ahead of that and stepping down. I will say moments ago we did hear from Burnham that he would be running as the next leader of the Labour Party, and this morning we've been seeing prominent Labour officials coming out to throw their support behind Burnham. So he could very well be the next Prime Minister, but we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Starmer, for his part, won in a landslide in 2024, but as you guys mentioned, there had been growing calls for him to step down in recent weeks and months. There was frustration that Labour was losing support to the Green Party, to the anti-immigration Reform Party as well. Voters frustrated with the economy, with the rising cost of living, but also, we can't ignore the Epstein scandal, and we've talked about it repeatedly, but Starmer was responsible for appointing Peter Mandelson as British ambassador to the U.S. at a time when it was known that Mandelson had closed ties to Epstein, and so there had been calls for him to step down back then as well. He survived that, but clearly the frustration kept mounting. And we'll see if we get more reaction from world leaders. We heard from the Australian Prime Minister this morning saying Starmer can be proud of what he's accomplished. We, of course, heard from President Trump over the weekend saying that Starmer would step down. So unclear if Trump had been given a heads up or if that was just speculation on his part. He said that Starmer had failed on things like immigration and energy. We know that there had been no love lost there between Trump and Starmer. Trump frustrated with Starmer for not getting involved in Iran. So we'll see if we get additional reaction from President Trump as the day goes on.
Okay, MS Now international reporter Ines de la Cuetera, thank you very much, reporting live from London there. We've had a very interesting weekend, David, in terms of Donald Trump's relationships with European leaders. As Ines was saying there, no love lost at the end between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump. He tried very hard for the first 6 months to do everything he could to flatter him. He arrived with that letter for a second state visit from King Charles. He had a very successful state visit here with King Charles. It wasn't good enough. There was the loyalty didn't seem to be a two-way street. We also saw the president attack Giorgia Meloni, another person who'd been a stalwart European ally of his. If you are Andy Burnham now looking at coming into 10 Downing Street, or rather if you were advising Andy Burnham coming into 10 Downing Street, David, how would you advise him to handle the man in the Oval Office?
Be careful of President Trump. Handle with care. Keir Starmer seemed to have as his principal talent the ability to sweet-talk Trump. The moment you mentioned when he handed him the letter inviting Trump to dinner with King Charles seemed to be like the perfect setup. The one thing Keir Starmer couldn't do was to really fashion a coherent set of policies, get his motor running as Prime Minister in England to deal with the serious domestic problems. There just wasn't the political energy there. And we'll have to see whether Andy Burnham, the new leader, nothing in the end will impress Donald Trump more than somebody who seems to have a strong political backing in his country. I think Trump takes that seriously. But here's another European leader trying to be a centrist, trying to make policies in the center work and failing. You see that in Germany. You see that in France with Macron. You see that to some extent in Italy. That, across the continents, that's the problem. Britain is a very visible example, but it's not the only one.
Well, and Starmer's problem is he just didn't have a theory of the case. If you're going to be a centrist, you better be strong and know where you want to take your country. As for advice for the next prime minister, and I offer this free of charge, I've offered this to incoming speakers, I've offered this to senators, I've offered this to a lot of people. And I can tell you Donald Trump respects strength. And I guarantee you he's far more likely to re-engage with Giorgia Meloni than he would be to ever respect somebody that kisses up to him. It's just the way he is. It's the way he's always been. Michael, that aside, let's talk about Britain and the problem with Britain right now. We move from Italy, talking about Giorgia Meloni in Italy, to the new Italy, and that is, of course, Great Britain. When I was growing up, of course, you would have governments rise and fall every week, it seemed. Now it's Britain. Think about this. From 1979 to 2007, 3 decades, there were 3 British prime ministers. Over the past 4 years, there have been 4 British prime ministers. What's the problem with Britain?
I think you hit the nail on the head. There is a real revulsion of centrist politicians who make grand promises but fail to deliver on them. I think the post-Brexit environment in the UK, things have not fundamentally have been forever changed. I lived in London from about 2010 to 2012, and you could already see on the margins of what was happening, the rise of the populist far right, a deep groundswell in anti-immigration, anti-migrant sentiment. And, one of the problems is that the 2 leading parties, the Conservatives and Labour, never really got their hands on the matter. And this allowed the rise of fringe politicians. Nigel Farage was one of them, of course. But now even the far right, people to the right of reform, this Restore Party, which is a kind of a successor to the old BNP. I think that what's happening is the electorate, the social cohesion has completely fractured.